When you take a photograph, you frame something in the camera's viewfinder. You're literally putting it into a box. Religion can also be considered a way of framing things, a framework for making meaning, or even, as some suggest, a Western concept that was created to help classify and study different cultures around the world. So what does it mean to photograph religion, then? On the one hand, photography carries risks of oversimplifying, reinforcing ideas about what religion is, where it belongs, what traditions are good or bad, or familiar or strange. On the other, in my personal experience, it can do the exact opposite. It can add nuance to our understanding of religion and foster connection with, even empathy for, people whose belief systems may seem very far removed from our own. One of those might be Christian serpent handling, or people like Pastor Mac Wolford, who's pictured here, handle venomous snakes as evidence of their faith in God. Photography deepens understanding through layers of visual information. I didn't grow up particularly religious, and I used to hold a lot of assumptions about religion. For one thing, I thought it's something people only did one day per week in a specific house of worship. But I also had a journalism professor that told me once, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. In other words, always check your facts and check your assumptions. For me, photography became a way to learn about something that was unfamiliar to me and to check what I thought I knew. It trained me to look for religion outside of the places I expected to see it. And in doing so, I began to realize how much it captured and distilled meaningful details about it. These brought into focus just how complex the religions around us really are, how they are entangled with culture and everyday life. Not only can religion be found in churches, temples, mosques, and synagogues, it's at truck stops, it's in prisons, it's in nature, it's at home. Not only is religion worship and ritual, it intersects with military service, honor, and bravery. It's part of national and cultural heritage. It reflects sexual orientation and gender identity. It is political. It is social. Photography deepens understanding through relationships. Photographing religion requires interacting with those of different religious backgrounds and spending time in their lives. In the process of doing so, you realize that behind all religions are people with complex lives and circumstances that inform and shape how they believe and practice. In my own work, I tend to visit people many times over the course of several months and years, shadowing them both during their formal rituals and everyday activities. And in doing so, we get closer and build mutual trust. And I've been witness to many personal, intimate moments that have shown me just how their lives intertwine with their beliefs and practices. Hannah is a young Somali woman I met several years ago here in Columbus, and she and her family had immigrated to the US. She was in high school when I met her and interested in learning photography. We became good friends as I taught her what I knew, and we went out and spent time together and photographed. She invited me to photograph her high school graduation, including when she was getting her makeup done, which is what's happening here. Here, she's Muslim. She's also a young woman experiencing the joys, challenges, and possibilities of growing up in the United States. Brother Armand is an Episcopal Benedictine monk at a monastery in western Michigan who invited me to visit the community there, St. Gregory's Abbey, several years ago. Over several visits, I had the privilege of getting to know both him and his father, Mickey, who was Jewish. Mickey had formed a close relationship with the community of monks, and when he passed away in 2020, was actually buried on the monastery grounds. The funeral was led by a rabbi, and his grave was filled in by monks wearing both habits and yarmulkes, including Brother Armand, who's pictured here. This experience really brought home to me just how intertwined religious traditions are in Brother Armand's family, and that monastic life isn't always as insular as we might think it is. I also got to know Pastor Mac Wolford, the serpent handling pastor pictured earlier, over several visits to West Virginia to see him and his family. I wanted to know why serpent handlers would risk their lives for their beliefs as they do. I learned that before becoming a pastor, Mac had struggled with addiction and eventually repented and committed his life to serving God. He also served his family, ministering to them and leading Bible studies in their kitchens. He also lived with chronic pain from a back injury, and sometimes it got so bad that he had to walk around with a cane, which I saw on several occasions. But he told me that when he was in church and touched by God to take up serpents, that all that pain and suffering would go away. Photography deepens understanding through shared experience, or what happens outside of the image itself. In May of 2012, Mac invited me back to West Virginia, along with several others, to an outdoor church revival he was holding. A few minutes into the service, he took out a rattlesnake to handle it, and it bit him on the leg. Like most serpent handlers, Mac did not believe in getting medical treatment for snake bites received in church. He thought it was up to God to decide whether he lived or died. He'd survived several other snake bites in his life. I continued to photograph, thinking it was my job as a photojournalist to document and tell this story and not to intervene against someone's medical wishes. Mac got a lot sicker, and his family decided to take him home so he could recover. Several of us went along with them. When we got there, Mac was tossing and turning on the couch as his family prayed for him, including his mother. It was so hot that day that his family had taken off his shirt so he'd be more comfortable. They didn't want photos taken of him without his shirt on. But I remember as I stood there, watching him suffer in front of me, I felt increasingly anxious and not sure how to handle what was happening if I couldn't use my camera. Some of the photos I took that evening did end up showing Mac without his shirt on, but I figured that when he got better, I could talk with him about it then. Except he didn't. Later that night, Mac struggled to breathe and collapsed on the floor, and his family called paramedics for him, but it was too late. My memories of that night came back in fragments, but one thing I've always vividly remembered is shivering and shaking as he was dying, and then raising my camera in front of my face and feeling absolutely nothing. It was a shield. It continued to feel like a shield in the days after that, too. I had no idea of how to process what I'd seen, what my purpose was, or even what to do. The only thing that seemed to make sense was that I was a photojournalist whose role it was to report. A lot of misinformation started to circulate about Mac's death. News media pressure started to build, and I began to feel like I had an obligation to explain what I'd seen and witnessed. I made the tragic mistake of publishing several sensitive images of Mac's death, including some of those I've been asked not to take. This caused his family enormous additional pain, and it sent me into a long spiral of grief, shame, and guilt. What I hadn't understood is just how fundamental modesty is to serpent handling and to Mac's family in particular. By publishing those photographs, I'd exposed his body to thousands of eyes. I also hadn't understood that the camera only creates the illusion of separation. As much as I tried to stay on the other side of the lens, I'd been a very real part of Mac's death and his family's pain, and my camera had put me there. I returned to West Virginia the following year for a memorial service the Wolfords were hosting in Mac's honor and had welcomed me to attend. When I got there, I again apologized for everything that I'd put them through, but they reassured me that it was in the past and that they were focused on honoring Mac's memory. I could have stopped there, but something kept pulling me back to West Virginia, and it was my relationship with the Wolfords. I rebuilt it by changing it. Instead of trying to stay separate from them, as I had in the past, I began participating in their lives, and we became family. Photography for me became a way to chronicle our time spent together and the ways our lives intersected rather than the ways they diverged. There have been moments of pain and discomfort. There have been moments of remembrance. There have been quiet times at home. And there's been lots of shared music and joy and gradual healing. These photos are a collection of the experiences I've shared with the Wolfords over the years and reflect the love, kindness, and grace they've shown me. They also reflect something fundamental about serpent handling that I never understood before, but now can grasp on a deeply personal level, and that is forgiveness and renewal. And they reflect what I've come to know about photography, that as easily as it can be a barrier or shield, it can be a window. That as easily as it puts things into boxes, it can also remove them. That it can blur the line between self and other and create new understanding on shared ground. In other words, that it can create a new relationship between seeing and believing. Thank you.